Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cu101 Week 4. So for those of you playing along at home and marking this off on your big cats of the world calendar, 4 weeks, we are into week 4 of 12. Mathematically, that's like, we're like 25, 30, 25, 4 out of 12. So, we are like a ways away into this class already. And so I'm not even sure mathematically what that works out to be out of your whole program that we've already just, boom, it's gone. It's over. We're done with it. It'll never come back around again. I mean, this is super cool. And we're heading into, I think, probably one of the weeks that you all will enjoy the most. And if you don't enjoy it, your families will love this week, or your friends or your roommates or whoever you feed, because you will be feeding someone, I promise. When you're first making it, you're like, this isn't going to be very much pasta. And then you're gonna be like, this is so much pasta. So, which is awesome. So this is going to be a really good week and you're really going to enjoy this. And I use your recipe for, like I've been talking about last week with the rice and the beans. I use your pasta dough recipe all the time. We make fresh pasta, I'd say maybe once a month, maybe twice a month here at home. So it's a pretty easy to work with dough. It's very versatile. And I know that you're all going to really enjoy this one. And if you never thought you could make pasta or would make pasta, you're totally going to, and you're going to love it. But I will say, with a little asterisk by it, you may struggle this time, but the next time that you make it, you'll have a really good experience. I can almost guarantee it. It's one of those things that you may even make it once and go, nope, this came out super bad. But the good news is it's flour and eggs. So it's fairly inexpensive to just go like, done with this, try again and learn from your mistakes, which is kind of cool to have something like this. So as always, you know that I love to share my screen. All right, so we got to show the warriors, because we didn't have so many weekend warriors this time around. Some of y'all were just like, I'm gonna sleep in this weekend. I'm gonna have to do it on Monday. But I did see some amazing work from the weekend warriors and everybody who submitted. I'm still in the process of grading. If you submitted yesterday or today, I haven't graded it yet. Between like in the last 24 hours or less, it hasn't been graded yet. Everything beyond that has been graded, like the weekend warriors. Theirs has been long since graded. Right, so on that note, we have to show off what some of our warriors did. I think this is mostly weekend warriors, ironically enough. Right, so I want to point out on John's here. If you look at that rice, right, you could grab a handful of John's rice and throw it in the air like confetti at a birthday party, right? That was what you wanted. If your rice turned into something sticky and mushy, something wasn't right. Right? You had too much liquid, your oven temp was off, your stock wasn't boiling, something was off. So you wanted that light and fluffy rice. All right, so for those of you wondering, why is his beans on his rice? Well, some folks I did say, hey, show me your favorite dish with your rice and beans plated together. So I did see some really cool ones. So James here, I mean, look at those beans. They're beautiful. Couple little broken ones, but like we talked about, you don't want to see a lot of broken beans. A few broken beans is okay, but if most of your beans were broken or started to taste kind of gritty, then you overcooked them or you stirred them. That's another thing to be really careful of, is over stirring, over mixing things. All right, like here, Vanessa has these beautiful beans, some really nice rice, and then showed me what it looked like together with, it looks like some chicken for dinner. Love to see that. I love to see your extra photos, but I need to see the ones that are required, like the beans and the rice plated separately, but then show me together. That's cool, right? Like Cheryl, I mean, look at that rice. Can you all see the little individual beautiful grains of rice? That is so important when you're making that rice pilaf, right? Which is why some of you, like we talked about last week, don't stick that rice in a mold. I know we've all seen the plating and the presentations online in magazines, and absolutely that's a way to do it, but I needed to see your beautiful light fluffy rice. And if you packed it in a measuring cup and put it on your plate, it's hard for me to see it. All right, I know Michael's here with us. because he's always here with us. So Michael is showing off his really cool cutting board or little platter thing here. But what I love is look at those beans. They're beautiful. You can see a little bit of that liquid in there. They don't look overly broken. You can see that light fluffy rice. It looks like Michael had a steak with dinner. So he showed me individually, and then he showed me what was for dinner. Right. So Elon here also, look how beautiful these are. I mean, I love to see the presentation and the dishes. Here's another good one. Put it on top. Look, somebody did dinner with it. Matthew made dinner. Put it on some little Tostito chippy cup things with some rice and beans and I don't know, look like some sort of steak and some pico. Heck yeah, that looks fantastic. Share it. We want to see it. Anthony, I don't even know what website Anthony is looking at. And Anthony's like, I am so la-di-da. I must show off my la-di-da-ness. Check it out. And I was like, what? Look at you, Anthony, with your la-di-da presentations, right? But all kidding aside, that's beautiful. I'm guessing that's like maybe some hot sauce you got on there, Anthony. Yeah, that's what it looks like. But how cool is that, right? He somehow managed to turn rice and beans into this really cool, elegant plate. Who knew? Right? Sarah Jean, I'm not sure if she's here. I didn't even peek for her name, but she's another one that was like, I'm going to la-di-da up, right? Do that. We eat with our eyes first. So if somebody were to be presented some of these plates, they would be like flipping out, like, whoa, that's not what rice and beans looks like in my house, right? And so, you know, if you've got two different places you can go to, and we're not to say that there's anything better or worse. We got two restaurants in town. You can get your rice and beans and they taste virtually identical. The prices are virtually identical. And one looks amazing and one doesn't look as amazing. It looks like it was just sort of slopped on there. You're going to go to the one that looks better. That's put that thought and that care into it. You know, I always think, and we've all heard this too, right? That to know how clean a restaurant's kitchen is, visit the bathroom. So I kind of think along the same lines when I see presented food. You know, when food comes out to me and the edges are dirty and there's, you know, not necessarily dirty like somebody else's food, but there's gravy on it and it looks like it's just a mess. I wonder how if they're not paying attention to what that plate looks like coming out to me, how clean is the kitchen? How organized and structured and in control of the kitchen are they? If the one, literally their one job, their biggest, most important job to make that food, if they're having a hard time with that, what's the kitchen look like? You know, how clean and sanitary is that, right? So everybody's mind works a little different. That's kind of where I go. I want to see my plate presented and looking nice. So kudos to those of you that really have been going out, you know, all kidding aside, you know, I love the beautiful plates. And like I said, we are a very competitive industry. We are. That's how we all become successful. That's how we make our money, is by being better than our competitor. Well, if you want to see your competitor, look at the little box next to you. There's your competition. Even if they're not in the same state as you, they're still your competition, or there's somebody just like them in your area, right? Everyone has a competitor. You all will learn this, you know, later on in some of your classes, but it kills me when I hear that. It breaks my heart when people say, well, I will be the only food truck in town. I will have no competition. I have $5 in my hand. I can take that $5 and go to your food truck. You know what else I could do with that $5? I can go to the gas station and buy myself something to eat at the gas station. I can go to the grocery store and take my $5 to the grocery store and make myself something to eat. I could go to the burger place. So when you think you don't have competition, you absolutely 100% do, even if they don't serve the same food as you. If there is somewhere to buy food, I can take it to a vending machine, and a vending machine just became your competition, right? So never, ever, ever from this day forward, think that you don't have competition, because you absolutely do. So kind of keep that in mind. So anyway, there's my little soapbox speech about competition that I hope you will all remember and take to heart, because you never want to get comfortable and go, I got it. I am the only food truck, or I'm the only place in town serving Thai food, or the only place in town serving this. That doesn't mean that you will last forever, right? You have to remember that people can choose something completely different or something exactly the same, right? So anywho, so before we jump into this week's most amazing stuff, Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, concerns about rice and beans? I know I saw the comments, which I knew I would see, about how good it was. And like, probably one of my favorites is, I had no idea I could make rice in the oven. That's one of my favorites because it's true. I mean, if you think about that, cooking rice on your stove takes up a burner, right? You got to make a ton of rice for customers for your restaurant. How much is it going to suck to tie up a burner to make beans for hours and hours and hours, and then have to tie up another burner to make rice for an hour or however long it's going to take, at least half hour, if not longer, when you can just make it all up and throw that rice in the oven, boom, you just saved a crazy amount of space, and that rice is fantastic. All right, so hopefully everybody also checked out, I posted a Chef Suzanne's Food for Thought in the class announcement, that I took your recipe and I added a little to it with some curry and curry powder and some peas. And it was awesome, but it literally started with your rice recipe that you all have. And that's why I've said that that recipe is super versatile, because you could add different seasonings, you could add different vegetables, you could do so much with it and make it versatile. Right. So I do see, yeah, that pan, I still burn my hands. I'm not gonna lie. I will still grab a lid knowing I just took it out of the oven or just took it off the stove. I will still do that. That's probably my number one Achilles heel, unfortunately, is to do that. So I totally feel that, y'all. Tara, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I actually sent the recipe to my mom, who also made it the same day. And she said that that's now her preferred way of making beans and rice.
Yep. I love that. And like I said, you know, I saw that too. It was so good. I made rice 3 days, 3 nights for dinner this week. And I was like, yep, I believe it. Like I said, it's a good, I don't want to say basic, because it's not basic. It's delicious, but it's versatile and you can adapt it and make it your own. And it's very similar. That peel off method can be used. You can do it with barley. You can do it with oats. Is it going to taste exactly the same? No, that's what makes it awesome, is how versatile these things are. Right. So, all right, now on to what you have all been waiting for. All right. So here we are making some pasta. Whoop, whoop. Right. I saw this and I just thought it was hilarious. So there you go, y'all. Don't be upsetty. Have some spaghetti. I feel like it should be a motto. We all need a shirt that says it. We'll get them matching. It'll be fantastic. Right. So this week, you are making fresh pasta. So when I say fresh pasta, it is literally just like in that picture right there. You are starting with eggs and flour and oil and salt, and that's really about it. So how do those things turn into pasta? Well, we've all heard gluten, especially recently in the last, we'll say 10 years or so. Gluten has become like this thing you hear a lot about. It's kind of scary. Some people can and can't eat it. But gluten is really, really important. And so the reality of it is gluten is made up of, and so this is like a really tiny little science class, okay? I'm not even going to pretend to understand everything about it because I hate science, not the thing. So I'm just going to give you the quick version, right? Gluten is basically proteins that react to moisture in some way, shape, or form. A couple of major ones, the gliadin and the glutenin, right? And basically, they make up gluten together. And some of it makes bread rise, right? Some of it makes bread or flour stronger, right? So basically, those are the components that we care about and are important when we are making. And I'm going to show a picture on the next slide as well. So I just kind of want you to get thinking about what flour is, right? And so for our purpose, we are talking about plain old wheat flour. We're not talking about, rice flour or corn flour or any other kind of flour, gluten-free flours. We're talking your plain old everyday boring flour, right? So how do we end up making pasta out of those ingredients that, if you think about it, flour and eggs and salt would also make us a cake, right? How in the world am I ending up with pasta versus a cake with the same ingredients? Well, science, right? Science. But the reality of it is there is some information that I want you to know about flour, all right? So think about it like this. All right, so in this chart here in the corner that I hope you all can see, and I will share this on the class page as well, but the reality of it is that there are different kinds of flour. Most of us are the most comfortable and typically see all-purpose flour, right? So all-purpose, that kind of sums up everything. What can I use it for? Anything, it's all-purpose. But there are, in reality, different types of flour. We've probably all seen bread flour, right? So you may see a recipe, or when you're at the grocery store, probably right in the middle at the grocery store, that's all your all-purpose, right? Then down low, you may have some bread. Up high, you may have some cake, but you know what, we kind of hang out in all-purpose world, but there are other types of flour. So I want you to kind of envision in your mind real quick. All right, so in one hand, I have a piece of bread, a slice of bread, and in the other hand, I have a piece of cake, right? If I take my bread and I do this, it's probably going to squish up, right? It's going to kind of compact itself. Whereas if I do the same thing with the cake, it's probably going to crumble. But yet, like we just talked about with pasta, they're the same basic ingredients making bread and making cake, right? The main ingredient, the number one ingredient is flour. So how can they be texturally so different? And so that's where coming back to these flour basics. And you don't have to memorize this chart, but I want you to kind of start thinking differently about flour, right? So the reality of it is certain flours have more proteins than others. And because they have more proteins, they're going to have a better structure. They're going to hold up better, right? So the first thing you see is high gluten is 14 to 15% protein. That's a lot of protein in that flour. And so you can see the very first thing it's got listed is bagels, right? If I were to take a bagel and try to do this, it's not going to crumble, because that gluten in there is really strong. It binds together. Whereas at the very bottom, you've got cake that's only like 5 to 8% protein, which means that that high gluten flour is 5 times more powerful, 3 times more powerful, right? The strength of the protein, right? So you've got your bagel in one hand or your bread in one hand and your cake in the other. Well, it's because of the protein, the strength and the bond of that protein. So I just kind of want you to get thinking, why can't I use high gluten to make my pasta? Well, because it's almost too strong, right? It would make your pasta really tough. Well, how come I can't use cake flour? Well, on the other hand, now cake flour is almost too delicate. It's not strong enough. So you want to kind of hang out in that 9 to 13 range of all-purpose and bread flour, right? So I know hopefully that was not some sort of craziness coming at you, but you know, as you move forward and you've got some baking next block, you'll get into this a little bit more. But I always feel like before we head into pasta, you kind of need a little crash course on flour. You know, it is like the most important ingredient in your flour. So you kind of want to understand it a little bit. All right. So there's my little crash course on flours and proteins, right? So what we're talking about for your assignment is we're really hanging out in fresh egg pasta land. But what about the pasta I buy at the grocery store, right? Well, the pasta you buy at the grocery store is dried Italian pasta, which is totally different. For the most part, it's going to be made out of semolina. So if you go to the grocery store and you buy semolina, because you may find it at the grocery store, and you take it home, and you're like, I'm going to make some fresh egg pasta with the semolina, just like the Barilla pasta at the grocery store. And you're like, what is happening? My arms are going to fall off. Well, because it is so super strong. It's not, you can't just make fresh pasta with semolina. You know, it's made for the dried pasta that you see at the grocery store in the boxes, the elbows, the angel hair, the fettuccine, the stuff already made in the dry section, right? So totally different entity than what we are working with. It's really hard to even find true fresh egg pasta at a grocery store. Sometimes you'll see it in like the deli section, not like the deli slice your meat deli, but like over by like the fresh cheeses and things. You'll sometimes see some packages, but even those sometimes have some stabilizers and things in them. So it's really hard to just go buy fresh egg pasta, which is why some of you have probably never had it, which means, by the way, you're in for an amazing treat because it's so delicious. All right. So there's also other pastas that we have to just touch on just a second, and that's your like dried Asian noodles. And those are made of wheat also, but they can also be made out of lots of other grains, right? So you can see, we've probably all seen at the buffets and things, the rice noodles, the vermicelli noodles. They're still considered pasta, but they are the Asian noodles. They are made a little different, right? Versus what we're making. So this is just kind of a basic, quick pasta flour kind of crash course. All right, so before we kind of go into us how to actually make our pasta, does anybody have any questions about the different types of flours and the proteins and the different types of pastas? Because I know that was a lot. And I was talking really fast because I get super excited about this stuff. I'm not even going to lie. I'm so passionate. This is so much fun. And it has nothing to do with my name. I have a very Italian name, but like I talked about, I'm just an itty bitty bit Italian. So I just like pasta. So there you have it. All right. So welcome to my life. All right. So cool. All right. So now we are going to go on to, this is our pasta for this week. All right. So the best flours to use to make pasta, just like your recipe is going to call for, is all-purpose or bread flour. So if you have either one of those, they will work for this recipe. They are similar enough. One is not necessarily going to be better than the other, but you probably have all-purpose flour. You want the cheap flour at the grocery store? All-purpose. You know, if you go to the dollar stores, all-purpose is what they're going to have. It's all going to be about the same, right? It says there that pasta flour must have gluten. There are exceptions to every rule. Obviously, there is such a thing as gluten-free pastas, but by taking out the flour, they have to put in other things to make it stick together to shape. So we're not really going to kind of talk about that, but those of you that deal with a lot of gluten-free products, there is gluten-free flour, but even that is still not enough. It doesn't have the strength, I guess, to kind of hold together without some other thickeners like xanthan gum. Typically you have to add in there. All right. You're probably all, if you've watched the video or if you've seen other videos, you've probably seen that pasta being made on a counter, right? And you're like, why are they making it on the counter and not in a bowl? I don't understand why we have to do that. Well, there's two different schools of thoughts, like why you have to make pasta on the counter. Now, can you mix everything in a bowl and then dump it on the counter? Technically, yes. But it's not going to come together. And you're all really going to see this when you start, because you're going to be like, my gosh, I just have a pile of grossness on my counter. It's never going to turn into pasta. Well, it is. It is eventually going to turn into pasta, I promise. But trying to mix it in a bowl where there's not a lot of room, whereas at least if it's on the counter, you can like really dig into it. And again, there's kind of an old school of thought that if you use wooden bowls or wooden countertops, that you're going to get a better product because the wood will help warm the dough and make it more pliable and remove some water. I don't know. I just know I have tried starting pasta in a bowl and then I just get angry and dump it on the counter anyway. So it's kind of troublesome. So you're going to make this like volcano of flour and put your eggs and oil in the top and you're going to fight with it. It's going to be like, oh God, my egg is running everywhere. It's okay. Just fight with it. Just fight with it. It'll be fine. It'll all come together in the end. But just anybody wondering, why do I have to do it on the counter? It's actually easier to start it on the counter than fight it with it in a bowl. All right. So once you get that flour and the egg and the oil and the salt, and you start combining it together, first, it's going to be this shaggy, sticky, gross mess of yuckiness that's going to be all over your hands and all over your countertop. And you're going to be really angry with me. I'm not going to lie. You're going to be pissed. You're going to be like, I don't even know what is happening here. This is so nasty. Work through the anger with me. Keep on kneading that dough, okay? For at least, I cannot reiterate this enough, at least 15 minutes. And don't be like, she's saying 15. She only means like 4. No, I literally mean 15 minutes. I literally mean it's going to take you 15 minutes to turn it from a shaggy, awful pile of grossness to some beautiful smooth dough. And I have pictures that I will show. Actually, there's a picture right there. Look how smooth that dough is. Isn't that beautiful? Look at that. Hang on. I'll zoom in. I'll share my screen. Look at that. That is your goal. And you're probably going to start tonight, tomorrow, whenever you start this, and you're going to start on your dough and you'll be like, there's no way. There ain't no way that my dough is going to look like that picture. It will. After 15 minutes, you're going to get it into a nice little ball. It's going to be smooth. Not going to have dents in it, but it's going to be smooth. Right? Then you're going to wrap it with plastic and you're going to set it aside. You're just going to leave it on the counter. It says 30 minutes. I am going to tell you, give it at least an hour. It says 30, don't rush it, because what happens is you want that gluten to mix with that water and form strands and hold together, right? And what it needs to do is once you mix it all together, it's going to be hard. Like literally, it's going to be hard. You need to let it rest so that gluten will kind of relax so that you can roll it out. Because if you try to roll it out as soon as you mix it, you will be fighting with a ball of dough for like hours. So you have to let it rest. How do you know when it's ready for you to roll it? I hope you can see in this picture the little divots. There's 2 little finger marks in there, right? Now, if we were to just take that ball of dough and wrap it in plastic and set it aside and touch it, it is not going to leave a mark. It is not going to have, it's going to be hard as a brick. But after, it says 30 minutes, we're going to say an hour. You could push your fingers in it and it'll leave a mark. Then you know that your dough is ready for you to start rolling it out, right? So you're going to take it and you're going to roll it out. And it says here, thin sheets that you can almost see your hand through. And that is legit. And again, I'm going to show some pictures. You do not have to have, and I cannot say this enough, you do not have to have a pasta maker. If you do, kudos for you. They're amazing. I love mine. Mine hooks to my KitchenAid, but I used to have one that just hooked on a counter and was hand cranked, and it worked perfectly fine, perfectly fine. But you know what also works? One of these, right? They're not horribly expensive. You can get a marble one, you can get whatever kind of fancy one you want. You can use one of these, right? Look at how cute this is. It doesn't try, it's not expensive. Look at it. And it rolls, look at that. Beautiful. This is all you need. Now, hopefully you can find one of these, you can buy one of these, you can borrow one of these from mom, grandma, the neighbors, whatever. Worst case scenario, you can use a wine bottle. So I would not recommend that. The easiest is going to be a rolling pin. That's literally what they're made for, rolling things, right? And so you are going to basically roll it out until it is super thin and you can almost see your hands through it, right? So you want to make sure that your cuts are consistent. They don't have to be perfect. So if you are using a rolling pin and you're rolling it out yourself, you're then going to cut it into even pieces, as even as possible, because you don't want a piece this big with a piece this big, right? Because they're not going to cook evenly. Everything we've talked about since we started now has been about uniformity. Things have to be uniform to be able to cook evenly. Well, a piece of pasta this wide and a piece of pasta this wide, not going to cook at the same rate, right? This one's going to be done. This one's going to start to turn into mush, right? So you want them as close to similar in size as possible, right? You're going to make sure to keep some flour on your cutting board, keep some flour on your rolling pin, just to keep things from sticking. Once your pasta is done, you've got it rolled out, you are going to make sure that you have some water ready to throw that pasta in. It needs to be at a rolling boil. And we talked about boiling versus simmering. Simmering is just barely a couple of bubbles here and there making their way through the surface. You want a rolling boil. We are talking, it should be crazy amounts of bubbles coming up. It should look dangerous and scary. That's what you need. You cannot put pasta in water that's not boiling. It starts to break down. It's not good for your pasta. And so this is another one of those things that, however you may have done pasta in your past, you're going to set that aside, especially if you were raised that you throw the pasta in and then you turn it off and you come back for it later. Please never do that. Cook your pasta in rolling boil water till it is done, then get it out of there. As soon as it is done, you need to have your strainer ready or your tongs ready to remove it out of that water as soon as it is done. It needs to be immediately removed because even 10 or 15 seconds can overcook pasta, right? So you're making fresh pasta. Your pasta is only going to take, true story, guys, a minute and a half to cook. So if you leave it in for an extra 30 seconds, it's going to turn into mush. So when it is done, you need to have your strainer ready or your sauce ready. You know, if you're going to strain it, you know, you're going to put it straight into your sauce. You want to have your sauce ready, hot, good to go, and you're going to take it out. You know, let the water come out. You can run it in a strainer either way, but then you're going to put it straight in that sauce, and it is time to eat. Don't make pasta, fresh pasta, until you are ready to eat it, right? That's one of the cool things about it, right? We've all made dried pasta in the box, right? The box pastas. And they take 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 8 minutes, depending on the size of the pasta. And then you can kind of cool it down, maybe even throw it in the fridge, and it's perfectly cool. Fresh pasta, not so much. It's basically made and then eaten right away, but it doesn't take 30 minutes to cook. It only takes a minute, you know? So it's like, boom, hot water, put our pasta in, boom, take it out of our boiling water. We're done. Let's see. I know I just saw. Yes, best flour is all-purpose, bleached or unbleached. Most flour in the grocery store is going to be bleached. It shouldn't really matter if it's unbleached. It'll work. Did I see another hand up? No? Okay, cool. All right, so the last thing then basically says is use it immediately or hold for reheating later. But again, your fresh pasta doesn't really hold for reheating later. It really needs to be used right away. And restaurants that make their own pasta, they normally don't cook it until you order it. They basically have a you know, a pan on the stove, or they have a little cooking vessel that keeps water boiling all the time. And when you go into a place that is making their own fresh pasta and you order it, while they're making your sauce, they get your pasta and they take that fresh pasta and they you know, throw it in that boiling water, and then they throw it on your plate or in your sauce, and boom, you're good to go. Stephen, do you have a question? Okay, cool. All right. So on that note, does anybody have any questions? Champion.
Hi. Yes. Okay. What is the longest amount that you can rest your dough, your pasta dough?
In theory, you could rest it overnight, but you know, you would have to like refrigerate it and then let it soften. But typically you're going to make it within a couple of hours of when you made it. You just want it to soften up. 30 minutes, I don't think is long enough. I normally can let mine sit for at least a couple of hours sometimes, and it comes out perfectly fine. As long as it's still holding together, it's holding its shape, it'll be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I've got a couple more slides on pasta, just as, you know, we've already talked about this, that fresh pasta is going to cook much, much faster. You're going to put it straight from your water into your sauce onto the plate. And so here is the question. So we've been talking all about this, and you're making fresh pasta. So which is better, fresh pasta or the dry pasta down the pasta aisle at the grocery store? Well, the best answer is they're both great. They are both very, very good. They both have their purposes. So fresh pasta, as you're all going to find out if you've never had it, is very light. It's very thin. Typically, it's very delicate. It doesn't need a whole lot to taste good. It doesn't need big, thick, heavy sauces, but it doesn't hold up very well, right? We just talked about it. You're pretty much going to cook it and then use it. Whereas dried pasta, your elbow pastas, you know, your stuff down that pasta aisle, you can take that and you can cook it and it'll hold for, you know, half hour at least if you cook it. And then you can also use it to make things like casseroles that you really can't use that fresh pasta as well for. Not that you can't, but you know, they're both good and they both have their purposes. And kind of like we talked about last week, depends on your business, right? So if you've got the people, because you're all going to see now, once you make pasta, how much work it can be involved in it. Now you're only making, you know, a little ball of dough, but what if you need to make enough fresh pasta to feed 200 people? That's a lot of time and energy and effort. So maybe you don't really have that. So you still want to offer pasta on your menus, but you're just going to buy dried, right? So but if you have an Italian restaurant and you are focusing on fresh, authentic cuisine, you're probably going to make your own pasta and then maybe do something else pre-made somewhere else, right? So you may buy your bread, but you'll make your pasta. So every business is going to be a little different, but just know that they're both great, fresh and dried pasta. All right, the last thing I want to show you, I'm just going to hit on this really quick, only because I think it's interesting. And because we've probably seen these at the grocery store, is additives. right? So for your assignment, you're just going to follow the recipe as it is, but know that you can do so much with pasta. You can add different herbs and spices and vegetables and, you know, to change up the color and the flavor of your pasta. I mean, look at those beautiful colors on there. You know, it's probably some of that's probably spinach. It looks like some of it's got like some red peppers and some carrots or some beet juice or something in some of those. And so that's one thing that makes making your own fresh pasta so cool, because you can do these things, right? You know, you can add in some tomato paste. It's going to give you kind of a nice rich red color and some flavor, right? So you're probably thinking cocoa powder. Why would I want to add cocoa powder? You may do, believe it or not, dessert pastas. But if you don't use a lot of cocoa powder, it doesn't really have a hugely strong flavor. So maybe you're looking for just some different colors, or depending on the sauce that you put it with. If you've never had squid ink pasta, it's awesome. It literally makes your pasta black because squid ink is black. It doesn't have a hugely strong flavor. It doesn't taste fishy or squiddy. It doesn't taste like calamari. It mostly just tastes salty. So it kind of it goes really well with like other seafoods. So, you know, there's just so many different things. You can roast up vegetables. Just know that if you start adding in some of these, obviously they're going to add, in most cases, moisture. And so if you're adding in moisture in, you know, using beets, something's got to give, you know, so you're going to have to take out a little extra egg or add in a little more flour. So there's no perfect, you know, every recipe is going to be a little different. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. So just because I just think it's interesting and it's fun to just try new stuff like that. And then the last one about pasta is, again, shapes, right? So you're just doing either, you actually, technically, there's not a set size for the pasta. I always say to kind of aim for like a fettuccine or a linguine, so 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch slices. But, you know, pasta can be made in a ton of different shapes and sizes. And so it depends on what you're going to do with the pasta. So we talked about certain things being better. You know, if you've got like a really hearty sauce, you're probably going to use something a little fatter, a little thicker, like a lasagna noodle or a fettuccine noodle or an elbow, right? But then if you've got something a little more delicate, you may use like some little tiny like ditalini pasta, itty bitty, that put in soup. You're not going to put a spaghetti noodle in a soup, but you might put some elbows or some little ditalini, little pastini pastas in a soup, right? So it just depends on what you're doing with it, the use, the sauce. So different pastas, different uses, right? And then just only because they kind of go in the same category with pasta is other dishes that are kind of treated and similar to pasta, you know, and that is things like your ravioli, manicotti, spetzel, which is amazing if you've never had spetzel. It's kind of like a pasta dough, but it's thinner. So you actually push it through some holes and into boiling water. And then you've got things like gnocchi that are more potato based. You've got pierogies, other dumplings. Almost every country in the world has dumplings, which basically is some type of pasta with a filling in it, right? And so they all kind of fall under this giant pasta umbrella, right? So like I said, I'm kind of partial to pasta. So, all right. So before we head on into the second part, which is our sauces, Terry, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm wondering, in future classes, are we actually going to make gnocchi at any point?
I am not 100% sure. If you did, it would probably be in world cuisines, but I'm not 100% positive.
Okay, because I'm really excited for that part.
Absolutely, but you can always make recipes, and I actually think there's a gnocchi recipe in your textbook.
I'll have to actually look into that. Thanks.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So when it comes to after you roll out your pasta, if you don't have a pasta maker, you use a knife, just plain old chef's knife. I know some folks have said, can you use a pizza cutter? It's actually going to be easier to just fold your, like in the video, Chef Luke takes, I don't know, it's maybe like a 12-inch piece of pasta, and then he kind of folds it in like thirds, almost like an envelope, or like a letter that you put in the mail, you fold it in thirds, and then he does cuts that way versus trying to make a cut on a piece this long. If you're folding it in thirds, it's only this long, so it's a little easier to do those cuts, right? Good questions. All right. So the second part of your assignment is tomato sauce. But I don't feel like I'm doing enough justice to sauce by not getting into sauces in general. And tomato sauce in particular is a very, very, very important sauce. And the reason behind that is because, for those of you that have already read this chapter, it is a mother sauce, right? And what that basically means is there are some 5, they say, sauces that most other sauces are derived from. And even if they're not, they don't come directly from a mother sauce, they're still very similar to a mother sauce. So if you were to bump into another chef somewhere and you get talking and they're like, what are, let's talk about mother sauces. This is like one of those things that everybody needs to know. You need to know your mother sauces, right? And so one of those is what you're making this week, which is tomato sauce. You'll also be making velouté this class and hollandaise, I believe. And then I think next class you make bechamel. I'm not 100% sure if or where you make espagnole, but you just need to know what they are. All right, so reality, what is a sauce? Well, a sauce is a liquid that has been thickened in some way, and it adds color and flavor to a dish. And we are focusing right at this moment in time on the mother sauces, right? And so from the mother comes smaller sauces, right? So just think about like a family tree. You've got your 5 mothers up top, and then below them are other smaller sauces that if you take hollandaise and you add tarragon to it and some vinegar, it's going to be a béarnaise sauce, right? And shallots is going to be béarnaise. If you take tomato sauce and add like some cayenne and some bell peppers, you're going to have something like a Creole sauce or a Spanish sauce. So there's like mother sauces and then there's smaller sauces below them. And in reality, lots of things get used as sauces nowadays. Back in Escoffier's time and Antoine Carême, back in their time, there really wasn't as many categories of sauces, but those were like the main ones. Well, now we can go to a restaurant and a sauce may be a chutney or a salsa or a flavored oil, right? So lots of things get used as a sauce to add flavor and moisture and accompany a dish and make it something special, right? But you got to know the mother sauces. So how in the world are you supposed to remember these? Well, I'm going to teach you from today forward so you'll never forget. Mother's name is Beth V. That is her name, Beth V. Bechamel, espagnole, tomato, hollandaise, and velouté. So hopefully you'll remember that from today until forever, right? So like I said, these are the main ones. So you've got your bechamel, which is a milk that's thickened with a roux. Espagnole is the brown stock and brown roux. Tomato sauce is your tomatoes. We are not thickening our tomato sauce, right? That is why it says optional. Hollandaise is butter thickened with egg yolks, and then your velouté is white stock, typically white stock, thickened with a roux. All right, so I just kind of want to give you again that just kind of, we're not focusing on all these, we're really just making tomato sauce, but I want you to know about all of them because there's so much to it. And if I would have to say what is one of the most important things that I ever learned in culinary school, in the industry, it's how important sauces are. We almost take it for granted sometimes that food should have a sauce. Almost everything has a sauce, even if it's a dipping sauce. Things typically should have a sauce. And so understanding what sauces should be and how they should enhance a dish and make it better is really important with what we do. All right, so I've got some, I just call them basic sauce info. All right, so like I just said a second ago on the last slide, basically all these mother sauces or all sauces are some sort of liquid, typically thickened with something. Well, so what is a thickener? Well, it's something that is added to that liquid to make it cling to your food, right? So that's a term, thickeners. There's lots of different types of thickeners. All right, I want you to know for sure this phrase right here, nappe, right? Nappe means to coat the back of a spoon. So sauce should have the consistency to coat the back of a spoon. So if you look at that picture in the bottom corner, that is a really beautiful nappe sauce. I don't know what kind of sauce it is, but it's nappe. How do they check to see if it's thick enough? You put the spoon in and you run a finger across it, right? You just run a finger across it. And if it leaves a mark and it's still clinging to the spoon, it's good. If it's really thick and goopy, that's too thick, and you're probably gonna want to thin it out. But if it's too thin, then you might want to thicken it more in some way. All right, so there are several different ways to thicken sauces. And so one of the, I guess, easiest, most straightforward thickener is reduction. And all reduction is time, literally just time, right? So we're making a pan sauce. So we put some liquid in a pan, and what we're going to do is just let nature take its course. We're just going to let that liquid evaporate, and it's just going to naturally thicken, right? And so that is very straightforward. It intensifies the flavor. You're not adding anything in it. It's just reduction. It's not going to get super thick that way though, because things don't naturally thicken a whole lot through reduction. So a lot of times you see other thickeners used. All right, so slurry. Lots of folks use a slurry because it's super easy. It is cornstarch and water combined together, right? Even the Mythbusters did an episode on non-Newtonian fluids, I believe they are called, which is basically cornstarch and water. And it thickens beautifully, and it's fairly inexpensive. But there are some downsides to making a slurry. If you use a slurry, things that are thickened with a slurry, because of that cornstarch and the nature of cornstarch, it doesn't hold very well, which is why if you sometimes you go out to a restaurant and you buy something and it's fantastic, and then you take your leftovers home, or the next day you're like, ew, what happened to it? And it kind of looks like you'd almost pick up some of your gravy and do this with it, like it turned into a Jello, and you're like, what in the world? It was probably thickened with a slurry with cornstarch. So it doesn't hold up as well. It's fast, like it's going to thicken like that. It's going to be good to use. A lot of Asian dishes are thickened with a slurry, but normally they've got sweet items in them. So it kind of, is not as noticeable with like Asian sauces, but, thickeners are useful. Slurries are useful. The number one, we'll say the number one thickener of all time, we'll say the best of the best, but again, there's a reason and a time and a place to use a slurry. A roux is what I would consider like head and shoulders above the other thickeners, and that is equal parts fat and flour. Your straight up plain old wheat flour, all purpose, bread flour, whatever, and fat. Your fat can be whatever kind of fat you want it. You can use bacon grease, you can use butter, you can use oil, as long as it's a fat. And you want to weigh it on a scale. So if you got 2 ounces of flour on the scale, you want 2 ounces of fat. And then you're going to heat it up. The longer you cook it, the darker it will get. So if you see those 3 pictures up top, white, blonde, and brown roux, right? The white roux is going to thicken the best, right? It doesn't have much flavor. It's going to taste almost a little floury. The blonde roux is going to almost have a little bit of a nutty aroma to it, but it's not going to thicken as well as the white. The brown roux is going to have crazy flavor, right? So if you've ever had etouffee, right, you have had a brown roux, right? Sometimes it shows up in a lot of Cajun cuisine, right? And it's tons of flavor. Sometimes it can cook for an hour or more, just fat and flour in a pan, just to cooking away. And it's going to get flavorful and nutty and beautiful, but it doesn't thicken for squat. So you've got, kind of like, well, I want it to thicken really well, but I don't really necessarily need that darkened color, that flavor, so maybe you're going to go with a blonde, which is like, man, I really want some rich, hearty, that kind of nutty flavor, but it's not going to thicken very well, right? So different roux for different dishes for different things, right? So it's just another thickener. I know somebody said arrowroot. Arrowroot is basically used pretty much the same as a slurry, except it's like 3 times more expensive, maybe more. So it does pretty much the same thing as a slurry as arrowroot. So just FYI, very similar. You've also got other thickeners, like something that's called a liaison, which is basically egg yolks and cream added together, and then they can thicken. Not used very often. You've also got purees, right? You all made some purees. Now imagine if you used your carrot puree to thicken a soup that it maybe would enhance the flavor of, right? So instead of adding flour or a roux or adding slurry, you thickened it with some of that carrot puree, right? So just lots of different thickeners. So I just kind of want to kind of throw that out there, right? So sauces, got your 5 mother sauces, tomatoes, and when you're making sauces are basically liquids that are thickened with different thickeners, whether it's thyme reduction or whether it's something like a slurry or a roux or a liaison. So I just want you to kind of understand those basics, and they're basics, but they're important. They don't get much more important than that. Let's see. Quick question. Oh, we're going to talk about the recipe here in just a second, Anthony, I promise. All right. So let's hop over to the tomato sauce. So we just talked about it being, one of the mother sauces. Oops, let me go back here. All right. So this is not going to taste like your jarred tomato sauce. Thank goodness. Not that there's anything wrong with those. Again, there's a purpose for everything. But these are different. This is different. It's going to taste, I don't want to say fresher because you're using canned tomatoes. So the irony is there that somehow it's going to taste fresher than jarred. So there you have it. Just a couple things I want you to keep in mind, and we'll look at the recipe here in just a second. Just to kind of, I think that's probably where we need to go next. So let's go to the recipes. So I just gave you guys so much information. So hold that question, Anthony, but does anybody else have any other questions? I've just been like bombarding you all with information tonight. And so hopefully you're enjoying it because we're talking so much. All right. So let me share maybe. Oh, Champion, I see you got your hand up.
Yes. Okay. So in the book, it was talking about with the tomato sauce, if you they were talking about the different ways that you can get it as smooth as possible and how the strainer was the best, but that if you wanted to put it in the food, use one of the other two, like the food processor, and I forgot what the other one was, and then put it through the strainer, that would give you the smoothest consistency. Is it okay to do that?
Just follow the recipes for the assignment. So we're going to look at it right now. All right, so let's look at that. All right, so let's head on down to week 4. All right, so remember to use your research material. There's some great videos in there again, and then there's also some really important chapters, including one on sauces. All right, so we'll go ahead and look at the tomato sauce recipe first. All right, so it does say up here, salt, pork, or bacon. All right, so it is entirely up to you. Essentially, salt, pork, and bacon are very similar. They are both cured pork belly, but bacon has been smoked where salt pork has not. So you can use either one of those. If for some reason you don't eat pork, which is totally cool, you can just substitute and use a tablespoon of olive oil. Totally up to you. All right, so you're basically going to, if you're using that fat, so if you're using the bacon, what is it? Anthony asked about pancetta. So you can, if you've got pancetta, you can use that. If you've got prosciutto, you could use that. Basically what you're looking for is some fatty pork so that you can render the fat. And what that means is you're heating up that pork, that fatty pork, and you're not looking to brown it at all. All you're looking to do is render, which means you're looking to basically melt the fat. Right, so once the fat has kind of melted and then you've got some fat in the bottom of the pan, then you're going to add your onions and carrots and use that fat to soften those vegetables, right? So remember how you sweated your onions for your rice pilaf by using butter? Well, now you're basically going to sweat the onions and the carrots using the fat from the salt, pork, or the bacon. If you don't, then you just add the oil if you're not using your salt, pork, or your bacon. All right, once your veggies are tender, not brown. We are just looking to sweat them and soften them. Then you're going to add in your tomatoes, canned crushed tomatoes. The jar or the can in the grocery store would literally say canned crushed tomatoes. And then you're going to have sachet, which will be a piece of cheesecloth, which you can get at the grocery store. Pretty inexpensive. Again, you can find these a lot of times at the dollar stores over in the kitchen area. Very inexpensive. And you're basically going to take that and you're going to put those items in the sachet, throw it in with your sauce. You're going to let it all simmer for 1.5 to 2 hours. Then you're going to pass it through a food mill. You can use a mesh strainer like before, or an immersion blender, right? So you can't just use a regular blender and you can't use a food processor. So if you've got an immersion blender, the little stick blender like on the bottom, that you can use. The reason that you can't use some of these other items like a food processor or a regular blender is because they're so, what they do is they incorporate a lot of air, which is going to turn your sauce orange, right? So it just incorporates a lot of air in there and it's not as appealing as this beautiful red tomato sauce, right? So then once you've got it blended, you're gonna add salt. It says a little sugar. In most cases, you're not gonna need the sugar. I know a lot of people think, I gotta put sugar in there. You really probably don't need hardly any sugar, mostly just salt. All right, so I'm going to jump over here. I see possibly some questions. Yes, sachet bags. Yes, you can buy those. They are very inexpensive. Sometimes you can find those at Walmart and stuff too. Cheesecloth, again, normally comes, I thought I had some in here. I think my cat's got it. I don't know where it went, but I had some. It's pretty inexpensive. Best time to look for cheesecloth and twine, butcher's twine, which we'll also use from time to time, is after the holidays. The grocery stores stock up on cheesecloth and twine like before Christmas and Thanksgiving. But then in January, they mark all that stuff down. You get it for dirt cheap. I stock up, I promise. All right. So any questions about that? All right, cool. All right, let's go ahead and look at the recipe. I think we're going to run a few minutes long and I apologize. So let's go ahead and look at the pasta recipe real quick. All right, so it literally is as straightforward as it sounds. You're going to take your flour, you're going to make a mound, like a little volcano of flour. You're going to add in your eggs. It says olive oil as needed. I'm going to say you're going to need 1 to 2 teaspoons is all you're going to need. Just start with 1 teaspoon, but you probably won't need much more than that. And then just a little pinch of salt. And then you're going to basically work it, keep kneading it till it's nice and smooth. And then you're going to wrap it with plastic, set it for 30 to an hour. And then you're going to roll it out and you'll use your pasta machine or you'll use your rolling pin. You'll cut it and then you'll heat it up or get your water boiling, put your pasta in there, and then put it right straight into your sauce. Right, so it literally is that straightforward. All right, so now I want to go back to my slides because I got some good stuff to show. All right, so tips and information for this week. First and foremost, follow the recipe exactly as written, right? They are very straightforward, but they are very good, straightforward recipes. So just follow them as is. The recipe says canned crushed tomatoes, right? So in this picture here, there's 7 different types of very popular canned tomatoes that you will see at the grocery store. They are all actually very different. So for this recipe, it says you need crushed. And so you can see just by looking at them how different they all are, right? So when you are wondering, well, can I use whole? No, use crushed. You can see the difference in them. Your grocery store will have them, I promise, over by all the other canned tomatoes. They're not as common as diced tomatoes, but I promise they're there. All right, so you want to use that. Don't use that blender. When you are making that dough, give it plenty of time to rest. Cook it until it is al dente. Oh, we didn't talk about that. Al dente means to the tooth. And what that means is when you're cooking your pasta, you should just be able to take a bite of it and it should give just a teeny tiniest little bit of resistance inside, right? It shouldn't just turn to mush in your mouth, right? So keep that in mind. You just want it to be done. And when I say it's only going to take a minute and a half, that's really about it. Because on this page also, remember how I said I was going to show a picture of what you want that pasta to look like? Everybody recognize what's underneath this piece of pasta here? Y'all notice what that is? That is a knife guide. right? So when you're saying, well, how thin do I need to make my pasta? If you were to lay your pasta on top of your knife guide, you should be able to see some of the writing underneath it. Right? I love this. I had a student do this and I was like, I'm going to take that picture for forever, because sometimes it's hard to say, put your hand underneath it and you want to be able to see your hand. That's a little confusing. This pretty straightforward. If you can't start to make out the lines from your knife guide, then it needs to be thinner. Right? Now, again, we did talk about this, that pasta does come in all sorts of different sizes and shapes. Before this assignment, really want you to get it thin, because probably the biggest issue that I see, and I've been doing this for too long, too many years, I've been seeing ugly pasta. And it breaks my heart, because y'all like, my pasta was so sad. It was all doughy. You know why? Too thick. It was too thick. I know you think it was thin enough because you're like, it was thin. And it was absolutely thin, but not thin enough for pasta. Right? So take my word for it. If you can't see your knife guide, and y'all got a knife guide now, or you got a ruler of some sort, if you can't see the lines through it, it's not thin enough, right? For this assignment. And then once you kind of get a handle on it and you're like, oh, I get it. If your pasta is that thin, it's going to take 90 seconds tops to cook. Once you put it in that boiling water and it comes back up to a boil, 90 seconds, you need to get it out. All right. So the last thing is, I know that some of you absolutely love these photos. So here they are. All right. So as always, your self-ID and sanitizer is asking you for some medium dice. You can do them both in the same picture. So when you're making your sauce, if you put your carrots and your onions in the same one, that's fine. Or you can do two separate ones, no worries. And then I want to see all of your mise en place. And I know some of you have kind of gotten in the habit of just putting the containers of things out. Now is not a good time to do that. I need to see this giant container of tomatoes, right? I need to see how many tomatoes you put in there, because when it gets to the end and you're like, I don't know what happened to my sauce, and I'm like, whoa, you didn't use near enough tomatoes. And I can tell that by looking at your mise en place, right? So I can tell more about your assignment if I can see everything you started with, right? Then I want to see your veggies, your onions and your carrots sweating in that pan. If you use that pork, then I'll see that in there too. But again, that's optional. Then I want to see a beautiful picture of it simmering. Now remember, simmering means very little, almost no movement in that pan, right? And then when it's done, you're going to show me after you have pushed it through your strainer. See how beautiful and red that is? It's not like smooth as silk. It's still got a little bit of texture to it. You know, you can see it clinging to that spoon. So that's pretty much what you want it to look like when you're done. Don't strain out. You're not straining. That is a very popular mistake, is you strain it and then all of a sudden you've got what looks like tomato juice and then a bowl of carrots and onions. No, you actually need to blend and puree those carrots and onions. Everything needs to be pushed through your strainer together, and that's what it'll look like, right? So then your self-ID sanitizer, all of your pasta mise en place. And remember I talked about that volcano, right? So you've got your flour and then your eggs, your oil, and your salt in there. Right, then you're going to start mixing it together, and it's going to start to come together. It's going to start to look a little dry and shaggy, and that's okay. But by the time it is done and ready to wrap in plastic, it should be nice and smooth. Right, then you're going to roll it out and cut it. Show me a picture of it cut, and then show me it plated with your tomato sauce. Right, so that's what I'm looking for, right? The pork should not be tough anymore after cooking for an hour and a half, 2 hours. It should almost completely blend up with your puree. It'll all cook together. No, do not have to remove it. Good question. That's a really good question. All right. So any other questions, thoughts, concerns? Awesome. All right. So tomorrow, study hall. In my kitchen, again, I'm going to, I literally don't know what I'm going to do. I haven't even decided yet because I'm pretty excited about this. So I'm not sure 100% what I'm going to show, but again, you're going to meet in my kitchen just like last study hall. So as always, if you guys have any questions, thoughts, concerns, make sure to give me a holler. And I'm pretty excited about this. I really think you're going to enjoy this. But don't let a blob of flour and eggs get the best of you, right? If it's not coming together and you're frustrated, throw it away and start again. It's okay. Nobody will blame you, and it'll be okay. All right. So thank you all very much for joining me tonight, and happy pasta making and sauce making. And I hope to see you tomorrow at 4 in my kitchen for some study hall. Bye, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Chef.
Bye. Thank you. Bye, champion.
Night, Chef.
Good night,
y'all.
Chef.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Go forth in pasta. You got this.
Bye, Chef.
Bye, Steven.